like I said, you know, trying to stay above 6 grand total gross revenue a week if you're independent. So with that, let's talk about how do you get paid out of that. Okay, back to the board here. Sometimes your pay is going to be broken down into some of these terms you may or may not be familiar with: line haul, fuel surcharge, and accessorial pay. Line haul is basically your base pay. It's kind of a base amount that a lot of motor carriers base their contract freight on, where they determine based upon weight, certain lanes, distance involved. They come up with a basic rate known as the line haul, and then there's a variable rate on top of that that's your fuel surcharge, and the fuel surcharge amount is going to typically vary upon the weight of the load as well as the average price of fuel for that particular week, as set by the Department of Energy. Accessorial pay, that is things like tarping fees. Like if you're a flatbedder and you've got a load that needs to be tarped, usually the shipper will pay a fee for you to throw those tarps on there, and some of them are good and some of them are not so good. Some of them are pretty good. You know, they can range, I've seen them anywhere from $50 up to $200 is what I've seen on the tarping fees. Sometimes you may have a shipper that will pay your tolls if you're on a route where there's going to be a lot of tolls. If you've got to make more than one stop, there's usually extra stop fee associated with each extra stop you have to make along the way, and things like detention. Those are accessorial pay. Okay, now here's a sample that I'm using. I will tell you that I am contracted to a motor carrier, and this is what I get. This is a pretty common setup out there with a lot of the legit motor carriers. They take, or rather, I'm sorry, I receive 75% of the line haul rate, 100% of the fuel surcharge, and 100% of accessorial rates. And what I'm finding, that typically works out to about 80% of the total rate. Now there's different companies out there that offer different things. I've seen, you know, 85% of the all-in rate, 80% of the all-in rate. When I say all-in rate, some companies just simply don't break down the line haul and the fuel surcharge and all that. They simply take the total amount that the broker's paying and say, okay, here's the total rate, and you'll get 80% of that, or you'll get 85% of that. Like I said, lots of different setups out there. But in this case, let's do some quick math. Okay, before I break this math down for you, this is very, very generic. And it's going to differ one week to the next, one load to the next. But to keep things kind of short and simple here, I'm going to give you some basic math and show you that you're not going to make quite as much as an owner-operator as maybe you thought, but at the same time, there's weeks where it's going to be better. So stand by for a quick example. Okay, so in this example, let's say we ran $5,000 total gross to the truck, and we know that we're making about 80% of that after everything averages out, so that's $4,000 to the truck for the week. Now let's say that we ran 2,400 miles that week. I know previously we came up with kind of an average of $1.11 a mile. Now that means our total cost is somewhere around $2,664 to run that 2,400 miles. Total profit is $1,336. Now that's not necessarily going to be a hard and true number. Again, if you're running this type of setup here, each load is going to factor in, and that $1.11 is subject to change. Some loads cost more to run than others. It's going to come down to how well you manage your miles that you drive, how well you manage your fuel economy. That's a big one. You want to manage your fuel well. You can keep that number a little bit lower than that $1.11, probably not a whole lot, but when you're talking about 2,400 miles, if you can knock 5 cents a mile off of that $1.11, well, that works out to a pretty significant number. So again, managing revenues and expenses is the name of the game, but let's give you a little bit more positive example. Okay, so this is an example here of a lane that I run frequently, and it's a good lane because it has minimal deadhead. It literally has no deadhead on one end, and I usually keep my deadhead, depending upon which customer I'm grabbing, anywhere from 30 to 60 miles on the other end. So minimal deadhead. Now, each round trip, it pays really good there and okay coming back, but the entire round trip I make about $2,700. And as long as everything, you know, if the stars are aligned with the planets correctly and I don't have any problems on the road, I can usually complete 2 of these round trips in a week for a total of $5,400 in revenue. Each round trip is about 1,100 miles, so 2,200 miles for the week. Now, when we figure out my actual cost here lately I've been taking about $700 in fuel to complete each round trip. That's $1,400 for the week. Of course, my fixed expenses run $1,000 for the week. Maintenance setback on 2,200 miles is $550. And when we throw all those numbers together, you end up with a total profit of $2,450. That's obviously a lot better than that $1,300 we talked about. But this gives you a good example of how one week to the next week can be really different. It's all about what rates you get, how many miles you run at a good rate versus how many miles you run at a bad rate, how well you do on your fuel economy and all your other expenses. So big gap between a bad week and a good week, and the weeks get worse than the bad week I just gave you. But these are the kind of numbers you should be looking at if you're going to be an owner-operator. Not that dollar for a mile plus fuel surcharge nonsense. Okay, on that note, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. I think I probably went over my time that I wanted, but hey, you know what? We'll see you on the next one, part 5, where we talk about Business 101. Can't wait.